Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the process of importing animated skeletal meshes into Unreal. And I'm going to be setting up a little bit of animated UI here too. So we're going to be looking at two different styles and two different types of animation that we can use in the engine. First, to begin with, I have here an asset. This is a animated crate that I've made. I actually just pulled this out of my Mandalorian project, and I've made a few tweaks to it in order to make it perform a little bit more the way that I would like to for this example. So what I've got here is I've keyframed an animation. So I've got my little latches here that are going to open up first, and so they pop open, and then the lid opens up, and then an insert made out of foam pops open, and the lid closes to hold it shut, or to hold it in place. And I've got in here in the insert, I've got a space for my weapon. Now I've gone and modeled the space here directly off of my weapon, so that it is exactly where I want it to be. And it fits the proportions properly. I've also gone in the insert here and I've added a null or an empty group, which has the pivot point exactly where the pivot point exists for my weapon. So if I were to go in here and go to object orientation here, you can see that the gizmo here for this null object, which I've called slot, lines up exactly with where it does my weapon. So all I have to do is just snap my weapon to this this slot, and it should just line up exactly where I want it to go. So this is the animation that I have. I have the chest opening and the little insert popping open so that the player can see the weapon. And yeah, we're good to go. So I'm going to go and grab all of this. I want to make sure that I include everything here, including my slot. And I'm going to go in export selection, and I'll just go and overwrite my test object here. So I've got something called crate, and I would like to make sure that I am including the animation here. Okay. With that done, we can get out of Maya. Now I'm in a third-person template here. I've got a little white robot character that I'm running around as. And I'm not actually going to be using this character. I'm actually going to override the camera, and I'm just going to go put my chest kind of over here in the corner. And I'm not really worried too much about the character. I'm actually just gonna override it so that we're in a first person looking at the crate kind of thing. Now I've also gone and imported already my materials for this piece. I've got the weapon in here. I've got all of its materials built already. And I've actually already brought in all of the textures and materials for the loot crate as well. So everything that I need is here with the exception of just my actual mesh. So I'm going to go and import into the game editor, and I'm going to bring in the crate. Now, important to note is that this is a skeletal mesh, meaning it is a mesh that has a hierarchical family in terms of how these objects are related to one another. Or it contains a rig, some joints or bones that are telling the object how to move. I'm going to make sure that skeletal mesh is checked off here because that's what I'm importing. And I also want to import my mesh. Again, without this, I would be just importing an animation, not something that I want. I actually want both to come in. Next is my skeleton, and I want to leave this blank. Now, if this were not blank when you try to import it, that would mean that it's trying to take this new mesh that you're importing and assigning it to an existing skeleton. Now, this would work if we had a character and we were bringing in, let's say, a new crouch animation. We could assign it to that skeleton, and that would be correct. But in this case, we don't want to assign our crate to another skeleton. It has its own. So by leaving this blank, it'll generate a new skeleton in Unreal for our object. I've also gone and turned off the physics asset here. I don't actually want this thing to behave as a physics object, so I will leave that off. If I need to go and create collision down the road, I will do so, but for now, I don't actually need that. I will now, I also want to make sure that my import animations is turned on, and that I'm bringing in the exported time. So however many frames existed in Maya is how many frames it'll bring in here. So I'll hit import, and we should get two errors or warnings that pop up. Now, these two warnings are not anything I really need to worry about. The first says that there's no smoothing group information, which is fine. I don't have any smoothing group information on my file, so I'm not really worried about that. The second is it says it could not find the bind pose. Well, since I'm not using a typical rig using joints or bones, there was no binding. There was no attaching my geometry to a skeleton. It actually just is the geometry being animated. So I can also ignore that warning. After the import is completed, we shall have 3 files here. We have our geometry, our animation, and our skeleton. Okay, so let's go make sure that each of these things is behaving the way that it should. First, I'm going to go into the mesh, and I want to make sure that all of my materials here exist the way that they did inside of Maya. I want to make sure that anything that I had signed, a particular set of textures or materials, is set up in the same way here. So I have the main body of the crate, which is the main object here. I have something called panels. These are just the little lit up displays in the front of the object. And then finally, I have the insert itself. It has its own material as well. And so that looks like it's working exactly the way that I want it to. We're going to have to go and assign those materials. We'll come back and do that in a second. The second file is the animation, and I also want to double check that this is moving and behaving the way that I want it to. And you can see here, it appears to be doing just that. So it's moving, it's rotating, and everything seems to behave exactly the way that we want it. So good, that works well as well. Finally, the skeleton, which is the series of joints. You can see here the slot is present, which is again where I'm going to be attaching my weapon. So that's good. That means that we don't have to go and do anything here. Now, you could also, if you wanted to, just go onto where the bone for the insert is, and you could right click and you could add a socket here, and you could attach your weapon to the socket. But since I was very particular about where I wanted my weapon to go, I have a cutout that I want it to sit in. Well, that means I'm going to want to place it very particularly in a specific spot. So that's why I'm including a slot here. Okay, let's go and assign our materials to this object to make sure that it renders the way that we want it to. So again, I have my materials here all planned out and set up already. So I'm just going to go and increase this here. So there is my loot crate material. I also have my panels material. It's going to go here. And then I have the insert, which is going to go in here. So if I go and take a look at this now, we have some little blinking lights on the panels here, making it look like it's kind of alive and things are happening. So that's kind of cool. We have the actual proper texture for this object, which looks good. And if I kind of sneak a peek inside, we should see this kind of foam insert in here. Now, the foam insert doesn't actually look the way that I intended it to. And in fact, I'm going to want to go check this out in the animation so that I can see it here. So I'm just using a tiling material for the foam here. And I can see, looking at it, that the tiling is not set up correctly. So this is something that I wasn't able to check on yet until I went and created this asset. So what I'm going to do, I only have 3 textures here. This is a pretty simple process. I'm just going to go create a texture coordinate, which I'm going to multiply, in this case, by a scalar called tiles, which I'll give a default value of 1, so we don't multiply by 0. And I'll just go and put this into the UVs of each of my texture slots. We'll just recompile this. I'm also going to save that. That's good. So the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instance of this material, and that's just going to make it easier to control the tiling real time here as we check it out. So if I go into the material instance and I undock this, I can now actually go and turn this up here until the foam that I've created, the material here that was meant to be that kind of packing foam, has about the right scale that I'm after. I want to probably avoid getting too many tiles here that we start seeing repetition, but there, something like that looks okay. It just needs to read as some kind of styrofoam. All right, I am pleased with that. I am pleased with that. And I'm pleased with that. So now all of my materials are set up correctly. I have my mesh set up correctly. And I have my weapon set up correctly. So all of the materials on my weapon are also set up all the way that I like. So now that I have everything here inside of the engine, it's now time to start combining these into a prop, into a asset that can be manipulated. So that's what I want to do now. So to do this, I'm going to go in and create a blueprint. So I'm going to go into, this is just my environment folder here that I've got created. I'm going to create a new folder called blueprints. And inside here, we're going to create a new blueprint. This is going to be an actor blueprint, something that we interact with in the world. I'll name this BP underscore for blueprint, and this will be called crate. Excellent. Now that I have my blueprint ready to go, I'm going to go and start creating the system that is going to generate the effect that we're after here. So first component I need to add is a skeletal mesh. That skeletal mesh is going to be, if I use the drop down here, is going to be the crate. So there it is there. It's now in the world correctly. I have a animation blueprint slot here, which is not currently what I want. I actually want this to be a animation asset. So we're not going to be wiring this up with any kind of interactive system with the player. We just want kind of plain animation. If I use the drop down, I can pick the animation from a list. Now this list is only going to show us compatible animations, which is kind of useful because that's the animation that I want. Okay, so that works rather well. I'm going to turn the looping off so it only plays through once. There you have it. And I'm also going to turn playing off because I don't want it to play until I actually use the button to instantiate that animation. So we shall leave it like that for now. The next asset I'm going to need to add, so we're going to go and add, this is going to be a static mesh. And the static mesh is my pistol. I might even want to go and name this in here, pistol, so that I'm able to track these things a little bit easier. We'll call this one crate. And now let's grab our pistol from the drop-down list. We'll go and choose the asset correctly. And I can see where it is here. It's just gone and placed it at the origin in the scene. It's not what I want. Since this is a child of the crate, that means that I can use the parent socket. If I use the little magnifying glass here, we can go and check and see all of the different bones. And the one that I'm after is actually the one called slot. Now, when I go and choose that, if we go and peek in here, again, because of the way that that was orchestrated, because I went and placed that pivot exactly where I want the weapon to go, I don't have to move the weapon in any way. It actually just goes and seats itself directly in that place. So that's good. If we actually go and check the animation here again, I'm going to turn playing back on so the animation plays. You'll see that the weapon actually just comes along for the ride here in the animation. So that's lovely. I'll turn looping on and off again so we can see it pop. There we go. So brilliant. We have the weapon now kind of popping into place. In a gameplay scenario, if I actually wanted the character to be able to pick up this weapon from this crate, I also have an asset here that we could remove when the player hits a button to pick this thing up. We're not going to be doing that in this example, but it is a nice thing to have these two things as separate entities so that you could do that. Also, the insert that I'm using here, I could actually make a different insert for each weapon in my game. So that way I could actually have the same crate, but depending on which weapon is inside, generate a different mesh here so that we always get the right shape for our mesh. Okay, so this works well. Again, I'm going to tell the crate to stop playing because we are going to tell it when to play. And let's go and bring that blueprint into the world. Something like that. Now I am going to go and tell it in here. I'm going to go and tell it to play. And that's just because I would like to actually make sure I've got it at the right distance from the wall here as that lid opens. And so I want to make sure that there's no penetration through, and that appears to be pretty correct there. It's actually just touching the wall. And so excellent, I can see that popping open and displaying the weapon for us. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is I would like to add a camera to the blueprint. And the camera is the camera we're going to switch to here when the player gets close enough to this thing, just so that we can go and take a look inside the crate and kind of the view that I would like it to have. So we're going to go add component, and I'm going to add a cinematic camera. I'm going to select that cinematic camera, and we can go and actually change our view here. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to choose the cinematic camera from here, but I am going to be able to go and move this in a way that I'd like. We'll go and move this 90 degrees, and we'll kind of have to do a little bit of testing See that this works the way that we want it to. I think I need to move it up just a little bit here because this is going to open in that way. And move it back just a little bit here too. So I can see this in this view here when I go and select my crate. And so this is how I can actually go and manipulate this camera here so that I can actually make sure that I'm seeing what I want to see. So again, when that crate opens, the weapon should be about center screen here now. And again, I can go and turn this on so that we can check that. So let's do, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off playing, but I'm going to set the initial position here to 1. 1.4. 1.5. Let's try and get to the end of the animation. There we go. And that's going to let us, we'll switch this to world. It's going to let me position the camera here in a place that is a little bit more helpful. Back this up a little bit. Drop it down a little bit more. Come on. There we go. So now we've got a good view here. Now the looking at it, if I use my little viewport here, I know it's really small, but I can see it's actually out of focus. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to add or change the focal settings on my camera in order to make sure that that weapon is actually in focus. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over. I've got the camera selected. I'm going to go to my focus settings and open that up. And here is a manual focus distance that we can use. To do this, I'm going to use the little eyedropper and click on the pistol. And what that'll do is it'll set the camera's focal distance to match that distance. So if I click on this and click on the pistol here, that should work. Manual. Why is that not actually changing? Interesting. Reset that. It doesn't seem like it's actually changing. Let's leave that. Looks like we're in focus here now. Yeah, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to switch that camera just yet. So we'll have to blueprint this in or script this in so that it is allowing us to view that correctly. We won't be able to change that until we get there, but it looks like that is pretty close to what I'm after in terms of the setup here. So I've got a camera. It's showing off the weapon the right way, which is good. The next thing that I want is because I want the character to interact with this. So essentially, when the character gets close enough to the crate, I would like to put an icon on screen that says press this button to interact. And then I want to have the crate open when the player presses that button. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a widget so we can write this on screen. But I also need to check for the player's collision. And so to do that, I'm going to add a component here, and we're going to add a, let's do this with a sphere collision, like so. And this sphere is what's going to track if the player is close enough to this object in order to hit this thing off. And so the nice thing about this is that we can actually just, with this radius here, change how close we want the player to be before they're able to interact with this. Be something about here. It looks like maybe somewhere around 2 meters. Looks good. Again, this is a 2 meter radius, so that means the character has to be within 2 meters of the crate to be able to open it. So that's going to work quite nicely. Let's make sure we don't move this object here. Let's go reset that back. And actually, I can leave it like that. I'll leave it on the ground. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into my event graph, and we're going to use the sphere here, and we're going to see on begin overlap, like so. And we're going to just check and see if the object that is overlapping is the player. And so that'll be useful. So we also need to create our little UI here that we're going to get on screen. So I'm going to do this in my blueprint folder here too. I'm going to go user interface widget blueprint, and I'll call this WPP for widget blueprint. And I'll call it crate UI. And now this is going to be the UI that appears on screen when we get kind of close enough that we want the user to be able to interact with this. Okay, let's go import an image that we can use here. I'm going to place this in my, let's go to environment. I'm going to create a new folder and I'll call this images. I keep these separate from textures. We're going to go and import. And in my gunsmith folder, I have an icon folder here, and I have an A button from the Xbox controller that I'm going to use. So we're going to go and bring that in. And this object is 256 by 256 pixels. So it's a fairly small image. We're going to go back to our blueprint folder, back into our create UI, and I'm going to go and create an image in our UI, something like that. I'm going to size this to content, and then we're going to go and adjust the content. So in the brush image, we can grab that A button texture, and you can see that it is massive in this world here. I'm going to change my anchor to the bottom center so that it is where I would like it to be. And we can go and actually scale this sucker down. I'm going to go and move the scale here, and we can set this to be 40 by 40. That looks a little small. Increase this up 60 by 60. That's a little bit better. So we'll use 60 by 60 here. And I would like to get this thing as centered as I can in the positioning here so that we end up with something quite nice. So we're going to do this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the position to -30. This should be 60 here again. -30. And then the Y position, we'll just go and slide this up a little bit like that. So now it's nice and centered, maybe a little bit higher. And then I'm going to add some text along with this as well. So I'm going to bring the text on screen, but then I'm going to parent the text to the image so that these things have a relationship to one another. That cannot have children. That's interesting. Okay, well, we'll do it this way regardless. So what I'm going to do here is just go and change the text here. I'm going to type press to open, like so, and we'll size this object to the content here. And I will try and go and move this over so that it's centered as well. And there we have now a button press to open that we would like to have appear when the player gets near enough to the system. In a moment, we're going to be adding an animation to this as well. I don't want this to just simply pop and be on screen and then disappear when we don't want it. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be playing an animation of this thing kind of getting larger and appearing on screen. I may want to actually go and put this inside of a parent object so that I can animate the two things together. But we'll come to that in a moment. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to return to my my object, and I am going to add another component, which is going to be a widget. So I'm adding this to my blueprint instead of adding it to the main camera in game here, and that's because I'm in a third-person character, meaning I don't want to have that press A to interact on screen all the time. I just actually want to have it when she gets near enough to the crate, and then again we're going to have that that camera take over. It's that camera that we actually want to have the widget appear on. So let's go create a begin play. We'll come back to this overlap here in a moment. So on begin play, we are going to create, we are going to get our widget, and we are going to get our camera, and we are going to add to, oh, we cannot add to it this way. Let's see if we can do it this way. Create widget. No, it doesn't look like we can do it in this way. Okay, so I'm going to remove the widget from here. We will put it on the character. Let's go into the character's blueprint, and I'll add the widget to this. Actually, no, I'm just going to add it to the world. Let's go to blueprints and level blueprint. I'll add it in here. So I'm going to create a begin play. And we are going to create a widget. That widget is going to be our crate UI. We are going to promote this to a variable so that we can go and manipulate it. I'm going to call it crate UI here, like so. We are going to get the player controller, and we're going to plug that into the owning player of our create widget. The next thing we want to do is we want to add to viewport, like so that the widget gets created and added to the viewport. So if I hit play, we should see this on screen now. Looks like I've got to go and adjust my my anchor point for this. We'll save. We'll go back here. Let's stop and play again. There we go. That's better. So there's our press A to open, which is, currently on screen. We don't actually want it on screen at the moment. We're going to want to make that disappear. And so we'll create a system here to make that appear. I'm also going to go in and create the animation for this thing. So let's see if we can create some object that we can use as a parent for these two objects together. So what I'd like them to do is I'd like them to kind of drift from off screen and fade in at the same time. I don't want this to be an overpowering animation. I don't want it to be this big, long, drawn out thing. Maybe something just half a second long. And what that's going to do is it's just going to add a little bit of polish to this. So instead of just something that pops and it's on screen, you get this kind of fade in as it appears on screen and fade out as it disappears, which is just going to look a little bit more subtle and a little bit more pleasing to the eye, as it were. So the idea is to go and create something that I can actually parent both of these things to. So let's go create let's try a vertical box here. I'm going to go drag this vertical box into the scene, and I'm going to put the image in the vertical box. I'm going to put the text in the vertical box, like so. We're going to go grab the vertical box, and we will size it to the content, and we'll anchor it in the bottom center here as well. And we'll go and just move this. We're going to go and adjust our text so that our text is centered. And then we're going to go and adjust our image. And we'll bring this down. I believe 60 by 60 was what was fitting nicely here. Let's go back to this. Let's turn this size to content off. And let's grab our text. That is centered. That is centered. So it looks like it's going to try and continue squishing. There we go. Our button into place. So I'm just going to make this 60 by 60 here. And we can, I think the text will be fine like that. No, we want to move the text. So this is not going to be 60. Okay, so that's what's going on. So I'm going to need to alter the way that I'm doing my text here. Like so. Press to open. That is fine there. We're going to justify it like that. Have the vertical box. We'll see if we can't change the Y here a little bit. There we go. Okay. That's working a little bit better. I'm going to make sure, again, that my anchor point is in the bottom center. And we're going to go and reset our positions here. The size, I'm going to set to 80. And 120, I think works well. And then the X position, we're going to minus 40 so that it's centered. I think I'm going to leave it right about there. So we'll actually have it drift on screen from being off screen. Like that, so we can actually leave that where it is. So let's create now the animation here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is in the animation tab, I'm going to click the new animation button, and I'll call this create UI anim, like so that I have a name I can track. Now, in this animation, there's nothing here by default when it, excuse me, when it gets created. So we're going to add a new track, and we need to choose what it is that we're going to animate. I'm going to animate the vertical box. This is why I have these things parented together, is that I'm going to animate this object, and whatever's parented or a child of this object is going to come along for the ride. It's going to move along with it. So here's my vertical box, and I'm going to add a track to this. And the first thing I'm going to animate is the transformation of this object. So I would like this animation to be about half a second. Let's go maybe 1 full second. And we'll tweak it if necessary. So I'm going to go into the transformation, and the Y is what I would like to transform. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a keyframe at frame 0. I'm going to go to the last frame, and I'm going to now animate this to the position where I want it to be on screen. So I'm just going to move this slider here. It looks like I'm moving it up negative. We'll do a nice even number here of 250. So now we have an animation of this object sliding up onto the screen from off screen. Now, I don't actually want it to just do that. As I mentioned, I would like it to actually kind of appear as well. I want it to be invisible and then have it appear on screen. So the other thing we're going to do here, using the vertical box, we're going to add a new track. Let's open this up. We're going to add a new track to this. That track is going to be visibility, render opacity. Let's do render opacity. So I'm going to start at frame 0, and we're going to set this down to 0 so that it's not being rendered. And then what we can do, you can see that it actually fades in as it moves up. Now, I actually probably want it to stay invisible until it's mostly on screen here, like so. So we'll go and compile that now. So now there's an animation. Now we have something that it's going to come out and actually go in and change a little bit here as it does that. And I can go and add any number of things to the animation here too. I can go and add a scale component. So maybe if we go and keyframe these guys, and then go to the end here, and I set this to 1.125, 1.125, and keyframe that. Not only will this appear on screen, but it'll, as it's fading in, it'll kind of grow a little bit. So you get a little bit more kind of depth to that animation. So there's something kind of a little bit more polished than just UI on screen. Okay. The default state to this object is now that it's off screen and invisible, which is perfect. What I want to do is I now need to link this together, so pardon me, so that when my player interacts with this object, that we are going to play that animation of that object appearing on screen. So to do that, we have our viewport here. We have our widget added. If I hit play, we shouldn't actually see the animation. We shouldn't see the widget because it's invisible and off screen, which is kind of nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that when the player touches that circle, that we go and get our widget and we play the animation. Okay, so to do this, I need to go and grab my game mode in order to be able to add a conversation between these two blueprint systems. I have my character system and I have the crate system. So I need something to go in between. So in my blueprints here, we're going to go and add a new game mode. So I'm going to go and go to, let's see, where are we going? We want to add a new blueprint. And in this blueprint, we're going to add a game mode base. And I'll call this GM for game mode underscore crate. And that is what we're going to use in here. So I should be able to hit play and nothing is any different. And that's because I haven't made any changes to the game mode. It is kind of just its own thing. This is perfect. And now what we can do is we can go into that game mode and we can create an event dispatcher to send the information back and forth. So here, ed underscore, that's event dispatcher. And I'll call this crate UI. like so, and we'll save that. So now we have everything we need. On begin play, we are going to get the game mode, game user settings. Let's get the player controller. Get player controller. From the player controller, we are going to get the game mode. Get game mode. Not more. Mode. Where's my game mode? I don't need the player controller. So we're going to get in game mode, and then we're going to cast to, and we'll cast it to our game mode. And then I'm going to store a variable here so that we have a reference to our game mode. This way, I only cast once at the beginning of gameplay, and I don't have to cast all the time. So yeah, we'll call this as game mode. So that's lovely there. We have that in place. It's going to work nicely. The next thing that we want to do is pull our game mode out. And this. Let's check and see whether or not the other object is the player controller or the player character. So that we can make sure that, you know, if you shoot a bullet and it goes near the crate, that the crate doesn't show you the UI for that. We want to make sure that what we're interacting with is the player. So the other component, we're going to get this out. And I'm just going to hit equals equals, and we'll try and see what kind of actor this is. So I'm going to grab the player. I want to find out what that character is called. And this one here. So that's her blueprint. And if we go and find this here, we should be able to find the player blueprint in here somewhere. Animations, character, meshes, materials, textures. It's not in there. Third person blueprint. There's the character blueprint right there. So that's what I'm after. Third person character. So let's go back into our crate here, and let's see the third person character. And let's just do a test to see. I'm going to do a print. Let's just double check to see when there is interaction, when I collide with this object, whether or not it's me that it's detecting. So we'll hit play. We shouldn't see anything on screen. Nothing's interacting with it at the moment. And when I get to it, it says false. And so it is detecting the collision on my player, but it's saying it's not the third person object. Whoops. We'll go. It's not the third person object, the third person player that it's interacting with. So let's try player new. Let's try the skeletal mesh of our player and see if that's the case. So let's go find out what the skeletal mesh is called. SK mannequin female. So let's double check that. SK underscore mannequin female. That's what I'm using as my player character. So let's go see if it can detect that. Again, I'm getting a reading of false. It's not reading that that's me. However, I know that this is actually firing off when I get near it, which is good. Let's try other actor instead of other component, which is probably what I should have done in the first place. So yeah, so it's not that. Let's go back to the third person in here. Drop down. Third person character. As that's the actor that's in use, not the component. So it's, yeah, it's still not detecting that. Why don't we print what that object is and see? So instead of checking to see what this actor is and then printing true or false, let's just print what this object is and see what actor it is actually finding. So I go up here, it is the third person character. So it is detecting that. I don't know why this is returning false here when the other actor, that is the third person character that we're looking for. Let's leave this as is for now. I think Yeah, and we'll leave it like that for now. Again, right now it's going to detect anything that goes near it, and it'll show the UI. We're going to need to do a check at some point to make sure that it's the character that's here. I'm not sure why that's not working the way that I want it to, but that's what we're going to do. So when we get here, what we want to do is we want to get our game mode, and we are going to call our event dispatcher when that overlap happens. Okay, so that's going to send a message to our game mode through the event dispatcher. And then we can go back to the crate UI. And this is where we can actually go and play the crate UI animation. So I'm going to go to the event graph. We're going to go to our construction script. We're going to, out down here, get the game mode. And we'll do the same thing that we were doing before. We're going to cast this to our game mode, and then we're going to promote this to a variable so that we can reference it without having to cast every single time, like so. And that's good. So now this is going to be listening for our game mode. And from here, let's pull out of our game mode, and we're going to want to bind an event to our crate UI, like so. I'm going to create a custom event, and I will put this on here, like so. And we'll go and name this custom event begin overlap, as that's what's going on. And on begin overlap, what we want to do is we want to go and play our animation. So here's my create UI animation. And we're going to pull this out and type play. We'll play that animation. So that should, now when I get close enough to this object, play the animation of our UI appearing on screen. Now, I also want to check for the player leaving the UI. Because now what happens is it's not on screen, and as I approach the crate, it appears on screen, and then as I leave, it's still there. Not helpful. I want it to disappear when I'm not within range of the crate anymore. To do this, I'm essentially going to set things up in the same way. So I'm going to grab this create UI node that I've got here, and we're just going to rename it create UI. Actually, we'll create UI appear, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create another event dispatcher, which will be create UI disappear. There's only one S in disappear, like that. There we go. So now we have create appear, create disappear. We'll save those. And just like we did before, so here is what's triggering this. I'm in the crate blueprint. And when we overlap with that component, it makes the call to make our system work. So cool. We're going to grab our sphere. We're going to say on end overlap, and we'll get our game mode. And we'll this time call the disappear. So when the player leaves the crate, we'll go and make it disappear. So there's that. In the crate UI, I'm going to get our game mode. I'm going to pull out from here, and I'm going to bind event to crate disappear, like so. We'll wire this in here. We'll create another custom event, which is going to be end overlap. And the end overlap is going to take our animation and play it in reverse. So now this should, when I get near enough to the crate, make the UI appear. And when I leave, it disappears. Now, there is a little bit of a flaw with this in that if I go through the system too quickly, the animation doesn't have the full time at which to play before it starts disappearing. So there's a couple of ways that we can make this work. If you just kind of flutter through the collision, it's not going to work as ideally as it should. And so the way that we could do this would actually be to in the widget blueprint here, to get the current time that we're at in the animation and make sure that when the player leaves, we go to that time to play backwards. So if the animation is in the process of playing, that it just plays it back. What I can do instead, however, is I can actually go and grab these markers here and move them back. So if I do this, if I grab this one and bring it to 0.25, and grab these two and bring it back to 0.25, and we grab the other keyframes here as well, I'm going to bring them to 0.5. We'll just truncate this animation to be only half a second long. And that should actually be fast enough that we shouldn't see I don't seem to be able to move that. Is there another animation? I want to make sure there's no more keyframes in here anywhere. It's not allowing me to move that. That should be okay. It's still appearing the right way. It's only half a second now. Let's check and see how well that works when we get in. Okay, so it is I do have to fix the speed of the animation. And the reason for that is that it's, when it plays in reverse, it takes too long before the animation plays as it goes backwards. So it's actually waiting half a second before it plays. And so I do need to make sure that this animation is the right length here. I just want to open up all of these things and make sure there is no keyframe there. There does not appear to be. It's funny, I cannot move it in either direction. That's my current time in the animation. If I go here, there's a keyframe missing here. 0.125. So set end time. Let's try that. Right click here, set end time. Yeah, it's not letting me truncate my animation any slower than 1 second. Okay. If that's the case, maybe there is a 1 second minimum for animations. Didn't think that was the case. Yeah, see, there's another, that guy. I think that's what was doing it. I think there was a keyframe off screen. Nope, still. Okay, but it's not letting me make it longer either. Okay, let's try over here, set end time. Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening here. But it's not letting me manipulate the length of my animation anymore. Okay, we'll make it. That's interesting. If I move it past, it allows me to do it. And it's showing me that there's a marker here. It's showing me that there is something keyframed at that point. I just can't find it. There we go. So whatever was there was a keyframe somewhere off screen, whatever it was. By just selecting the transform node as a whole, I've been able to edit it. So yeah, that's very bizarre. I'm not sure why that was behaving the way it was. So let's go and check this out now. So yeah, now I can actually, because that animation is much shorter, there is no speed at which I can run through this that it looks terrible. It always appears on screen and disappears the right way. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is now actually play the animation on command. So I would like to, while this thing is on screen, press A to open. Once that animation has played, I then want to give the player the ability to actually use the A button. Right now, nothing happens. The crate here is always going to be in this state. I'm going to go and reset the initial position of this to closed. And what I'd like to do is now give the player the ability to do that, to hit that button and make that appear. So I'm using the face button, the bottom face button here. I'm going to go into settings and project settings, and I'm going to go to input, and we're going to add the input to allow for this to happen. So I'm going to start by the action mapping, hitting a new button, and we're going to call this interact so that we can interact with things. I'm going to use the drop down. I'm going to go to a gamepad, and what I'm looking for is the face button up, face button top, no, face button bottom, face button left, face button bottom. There it is. So that corresponds to the A button on the controller. So now I can close this, and I'm going to have that input available to me. Now this is input, so I want it to be on my character. So in the third person, this is the map. Let's close everything here so we can kind of keep everything straight. Let's go to our third person blueprint. And this is where we're going to want to put that input. So here we've got all of the default input for the character running around. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to type interact. And there is now my interaction button. So when I hit the A button on the controller, this is going to fire off. The first thing that I need to do is I need to be able to see if I'm allowed to interact with anything. So when I'm allowed to interact with something is when I'm in this sphere. Okay, so being in that sphere means I'm allowed to interact with that object. So inside of my blueprint for my crate, when I begin the overlap, we're going to create a bool that allows us to interact with this object. That bool needs to be accessed by the player blueprint. So since we have a bool that needs to be assessed or interacted with by two systems, that means where I'm going to store it is in the game mode. I'm going to create a variable here that I'm going to call can interact. And I'm going to give this a default of off because I don't want the player to, by default, be able to interact with this. What we're going to do now is we are going to set that variable when the player begins overlap and when it ends overlap. So here I'm going to pull out from my game mode and I'm going to set can interact. So when the player interacts with the collision sphere, we're going to say, okay, well now you are allowed to interact with that object. And when they leave the collision sphere, we're going to say, no longer are you allowed to interact with that object. This is going to make it so that we can only press the button and have it do anything while we're here. Okay. In the third person template here, we're now going to get our game mode. So let's find if there's a begin overlap here or a begin play rather. There isn't. So I want to reference to my game mode. So we're going to begin play. We're going to get game mode. We're going to cast to our game mode. And we'll promote our game mode to a variable. And that will be our game mode. Again, we're doing this so that we only cast once. Okay, next, we're going to get our game mode. And we're going to check the status of our can interact. Can be damaged as game mode. Cast to game mode is incorrect. We want to cast to our crate game mode. we need a new variable. Switch this one to crate. Game mode crate. There we go. Yes, change the variable. So we will set that variable there. Okay, so now we can get the can interact from here. And let's just set a branch up. So this branch is just going to see if we're allowed to interact with this object. So if it's true here, then the player's interaction with this button can actually go and do something. If it's false, we're just going to leave it empty. It won't do anything. And so that's going to be pretty useful. The next thing we want to do is we now want to actually tell it to open the crate if that is true. So in our game mode, I'm going to create a new event dispatcher called open crate. Like so. So now in our character blueprint, if we're allowed to interact with this button, we're going to grab our game mode and we are going to call open crate. So there, that will tell the crate now that it's allowed to open. In our blueprint for our crate, under begin play, we're going to, from our game mode, bind event to crate open. We'll create a custom event. We'll call this open crate. And now we can just fire off whatever we want this to do when we have it work. What do we want it to do? We want it to play the animation. So we'll grab our crate. We'll hit play. And we'll put it in here. I want to make sure this is not set to looping because we only want it to play once. And that should open the crate when it flies. So let's see. I hit play. I'm going to grab my Xbox controller and I can interact with the character here. We'll get near the crate. The UI comes up. I hit the A button, which is currently set to jump. So that's a little bit of a problem. But it did open the crate the way we wanted it to. And then as I walk away, the UI is gone. Now, we shouldn't have the UI appear once you return to the crate. That's probably a bad thing. Also, I would like to set the camera to the crate's camera as it opens. So there's two more things that we need to do here to make this work correctly. The first is we need to set up a system that is going to swap cameras. And we then also want a system that is going to check and see if the crate has been opened before it shows the UI. To do that, all we have to do is go and find, this is our blueprint for our crate here. Here's where it's going to call the UI. Okay, this is when it begins overlap and when it hides the overlap or ends overlap. And then that's in our crate blueprint. And then inside of our UI blueprint, this is where we are doing the play the animation and play the animation. So to check whether or not we should play the animation, that's pretty simple. All we want to do is just see if we are allowed to. So when the crate opens, here is that play animation right here. We're going to create a bool that we can check and see whether or not we're allowed to play. That bool needs to be shared, so I'll create it in here. This is our game mode. This is going to be called can show UI, question mark. Again, the default here is going to be true. I want to make it so that out of the gate, when the game starts, that UI can be displayed. Now, we're going to get our game mode. We're in the UI blueprint here, this is where we play the animation. So I'm going to get our game mode. We're going to, from here, get can show UI, and we're going to create a branch. So if we are allowed to show the UI, true, then you can play the animation. If you're not allowed to show the UI, well, just do nothing. Then it won't play the animation. Now, I also need to do that with the closing or the disappearing of the UI. And the reason I need to do that there is because we can not play the UI appearing, and then when the character leaves, the UI disappears. It'll actually pop on screen and disappear. So we need to make sure that these two systems share the same condition. So if I do this, now it'll check when the crate is opened and when the crate is closed, whether or not it can display those things. The only thing it's missing now is to tell it that it can no longer show that UI. That's easy. We just find when the crate is opened, we get our game mode, and then we set can show UI to be false. So after the crate has opened, it can no longer show the UI. In fact, it probably makes a little bit of sense to not only turn this off, because if I do this, it'll never play. There's a little bit of a bug here. If I hit this, what's going to happen now is I'm going to enter the crate. The UI is going to appear, and when I hit the button for it to open, it's now going to set it that the UI can't animate, which means the UI is always on screen. So that's kind of a problem. We've got a little bit of a bug here. We need to actually tell it to make the UI disappear, and then we need to tell it, don't do this again. So to do that, we need to call our UI disappear and our can interact to false right here. So that means when the crate opens, the UI will disappear. Or if you just leave the crate's proximity. Okay, so let's go and check this. I go here, I get close, I can hit A, the UI disappears and the crate is gone. And when I leave the circle and come back into the circle, the UI doesn't appear. So there, we're bug free. That's working nicely. The only thing we need to do now is to go and I'm going to do one thing here. I'm going to go into my project settings. I'm just going to remove the ability for the character to jump because it's going to look a little bit better. Let's kill the jump. There we go. That way, when I hit play, instead of the character both jumping and opening the crate, go here. Now the crate just opens. There we go. All right. So the next thing we need to do is now just swap cameras. So by default, the camera on our third-person player is what's in use. I want to switch over to this camera when the player hits the button. So that's going to be pretty easy. All we have to do is get a reference to the blueprint that we're currently in, and when the player hits the button, go and toggle that camera. So this needs to happen in the level blueprint. In the level blueprint, I need to get a reference to our crate. So I'm going to right-click with the crate selected and get a reference to it. I want to get a reference to our player as well. We'll select that, and we'll get a reference to the player. These are the two cameras. So if I create a set view, set view with blend. Is it set view with blend? Set view with I think what I need is to get the player Get player. Let's turn this on. Get player controller. Come on. Get player controller. Set view target with blend. There we go. That's what we want. So if I plug the crate into the new view target, it's going to find the camera in that blueprint and set it to be our camera. And if I go and do the same thing here, but this time use the third-person blueprint, we now have the ability to swap between cameras. Okay, so I'm just going to go and do a test here to see if this works. So I'm going to go into keyboard, and I'm going to use 1, and I'll do keyboard and 2, and we'll just press 1 and 2 to see if this switches between the cameras. So there and there. So if I hit play, 1 shows me the camera on the crate, 2 goes back to my player. That's kind of cool. Now, I don't want to use 1 and 2 on the keyboard here to do this, but I know the system is going to work. What I want to do is I want to have this happen within the system. So when the player hits the button, that means we need the player's blueprint, because that's the player hitting the button. So again, this is only going to happen if it's allowed to do it. We are calling our game mode open the crate event. Just before we do this, this is where we want to swap cameras. So to do that, because we're swapping cameras, I'm going to create 2 more event dispatchers. The first one is going to be use crate cam. And the second one, I'll call ed use player cam. And this will allow me to now shuffle between the 2 cameras using my event dispatchers. So we'll get out of here and we'll go back into our player blueprint. And what we want to do is we want to call the first one here. So true call event dispatcher. No, we want to do this from the game mode. So we want to call event dispatcher crate cam. So when the player hits the button, it'll switch to the crate cam. Where do we want to switch back? The jump is broken here because I deleted it. Let's do that. So where do we, okay, we'll just delete that. There. So where do we want the camera to switch back? Well, that's going to happen after the close animation has played. Here is our close animation. This is playing in reverse. So we'll get our game mode. We are going to call set player cam. And that will now, after the animation is played to close the lid, set our camera back to the player. Now, if I go to my level blueprint, we can get these 2 things working. So we don't have a reference to our game mode, so we'll do that. We're going to get game mode. We're going to cast to our game mode, and we'll store it in a variable so that we have a reference to our game mode. So we only have to cast this 1 time. We can now get our game mode. From the game mode, we are going to now, this is what runs these objects here. What we're going to do is we're actually going to bind event out of here. Bind event to, where's our cameras? Bind event to crate cam. And then we'll grab our game mode and we'll bind event to the player cam. Like so. Now, you'll notice I'm using the game reference here and not here. That's because this is the game reference. I'm setting it here, and pulling out of here is the same thing as pulling out of one of these. So there's no difference between that. It's just a little easier if you're using it right next to it. You can just plug it in instead of adding another node. So this one is the player cam. This one is the crate cam. So let's not screw these up. There's our crate cam, and there's our player cam. We're going to create our custom events. This one is going to be our custom event player cam. And then this one is going to be our custom event crate cam. And I can just wire those in to do what they're supposed to do. So let's see how this works now. Might need a little fine tuning, but we get into there. And when I hit the button, oh, it did not work. And then when I leave, it did not work. So it did not pop between those animations in the way that I had hoped it would have. Let's change our blend time here. I'm going to set this to 2 seconds. And what I think is happening is it's actually playing too quickly. So I think it's instantiating the animation between the two. That is not the case. Okay, so let's figure out what's going wrong. Play the animation. Right, we don't want to do this. We want to set the camera before it plays the animation. So we'll play the animation and then play the animation. That's the UI animation. So that switches to player cam. That's good. In the crate, when we open the crate, we're going to play the crate's animation. I think this is where I want that to happen. I'm not calling this event. Or am I? No, that's what I did. I did bind all over the place here, and I'm not supposed to bind. I'm supposed to call. So this is not a bind. This should be a call. We're going to do this out of our crate here. Call event dispatcher player cam. No, that one's player cam. Let's break this. And then this one should be call crate cam. So I don't want the custom events here. I broke too much. Okay. Find event. Create UI, appear, and that's where I want to call from here. Call, create cam, and there. And then this one is call player cam, right there. Okay. Try this again. I got my bind and my call backwards. So there's our blend into the crate. I hit the button and then it pops back. Now, it's always playing the animation here whether or not I want it, which is another problem. So again, it means I've got an order issue where it's using the crate cam whether or not it's allowed to. I'm going to duplicate this guy over here. Make this a little bit cleaner. This here, put this here. Okay, so let's make sure that we're allowed to do everything that we're doing. That's all good. At 2 seconds is not bad. I'm going to bring it down to 1. So it's a little bit faster. Okay, so we get near the crate. The UI appears. It goes into the crate view. I press A, and the crate opens up. Now, I may actually want to put that instead of it looking at the crate when I'm near it. I think I actually want to put it on the A button. So if I go in here, this call the crate cam. I'm not going to do that here. So we'll just play the animation here of the UI appearing. But it isn't until the player, let's hit that. It's when the player hits the action that I want to call that crate cam. And so let's see now. I go here. There shouldn't be any switch. I hit A. Okay, so it's not actually going into the crate cam. Let's go see why that is. Where's my player? Game mode. Can interact true. All open crate. Okay, let's get rid of this here. We're just going to call open crate. Save this. And then where's bind event to open crate? There it is there. So on open crate, this is where it's going to play the animation. This is where I will set my camera. So we'll grab our game mode. I will call crate cam and then play the animation of the crate opening. And then we'll call UI disappear, set interact to no, and set can show UI to no. So there we go. That should. Okay, so it's still not giving me, it's still not switching cameras. So let's go input action interact, all open crate. So when I call open crate, it's going to go to the crate blueprint, open crate. It's going to go here. As the crate, it's going to call the crate cam. Crate cam is in the world. Find event to use crate cam. Crate cam, player controller. Go to crate cam. That is the camera with the crate. I want to make sure that this is all behaving as designed. This is not firing off, so we're going to hit a print here, and we're going to check and see what the deal is. I'll just leave this as hello for my error. So I only just have the one error, so let's go see what's going on. So I'm within range. I hit the button. It does say hello, so it is actually doing that. I believe what's happening is that this is firing off. And as soon as the crate opens, so we're playing the animation of the crate opening, and as soon as we play the animation of the crate opening, it's making the UI disappear, and I think that's why we're not getting the animation for it to close. UI disappears here. Use crate cam. Play the crate animation. UI disappear. Can interact is set to no. Show UI here. That's a construction script. I don't want that. So yeah, I think what's happening is it's just firing off too quick, and I'm going to need a delay before it switches back cameras. So if I give a 2-second delay in the player cam, I think this is what I need here. Let's delay. I'm using a blend time of 1, so we'll set this to 1. I think that's what's happening is it's switching cameras too quickly. So if I go in here and I hit A, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Is it's just snapping the camera back way too quickly. So we'll set this to 2 seconds because the 1 second blend time here and the 1 second blend time here. I think that's what's going on. I'm just going too quick between these two nodes. There we go. So that works well. Again, there's a little bit of fine tuning that can happen here in terms of making the system a little bit more game ready. Things like maybe turning off the player input once we switch over to the camera. But that is going to give us the ability to now pop this thing open, give us a little display of what's in that system. I may want to, with this thing, I'm going to go into my crate. I'm going to go to the animation position here and just set it to 2. I'm going to go into the camera. And I'm going to try and, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more with that camera. Show off that weapon. I think that'll work quite nicely. So if I do that, let's hit F11 here and Alt-P to play. And we go and walk in the world here. So I have the starting point of this thing incorrect. Let's go set that back. 0. And hit play. And we'll just full screen this. And let's go see. So I can run up to the crate. I can hit the A button now. The UI disappears. And we see the weapon appear on screen. And we may want to even hold a second or 2 on the weapon as well. So if I go into that delay here, maybe we set this to 2 seconds holding on the weapon before it goes and does anything, so that we have the ability to just kind of observe the weapon a little bit. So we get in range, hit A, UI disappears, weapon appears on screen, and then we go back. And so, yeah, I would actually want to hide the weapon too at this point once we go back to the player, and the player would now have the weapon. So we could actually go and give that there. So this is kind of it for this system now. We've got some camera animation. We're swapping between 2 cameras. We could even go and add a little bit of camera animation to the crate here itself. So I have this this camera here. You know, we could even go and animate this camera's position so that when it's, you know, we switch over to this camera, that it moves forward a little bit, maybe even zooming in on the weapon, so we see a little bit more of a close-up of it before bouncing back. We've got some animated UI in the form of the press to open button, which, you know, appears on screen, it grows, and it becomes more visible. We've got a full system now that kind of gives us the functionality here that we would have for this to work in game and have it actually kind of behave the way that we wanted to. I probably want to put some collision on this thing a little bit. You can see that there is issues with the collision, which is fine. You know, that's not a really difficult thing to do, but you get the idea in terms of how this is put together. We've got a very complete system now with cameras animating. We've got UI animating. We've got kind of the entire package here put together. And again, like that animation on the UI is subtle, but it's, you know, it's not jarring. You know, I probably could even make it just appear and not translate. You know, that would work as well. We could also do things to make sure, like if make sure the player was actually looking at the weapon crate before they interact with it, kind of thing, so that it was a little bit more set up in that way. But you get the idea. We now have the ability, so we can actually put a couple of these things side by side, and have the ability for the player to choose which one of them they interact with. So there you have it. We've got skeletal animation, we've got UI animation, we've got camera animation, all in one system here, with a lot of interactivity in between these things. So we actually get some pretty neat systems at play here, where we check for the player and what have you. And so, yeah, I hope that's been fun. I hope this has been helpful. And until next time, we'll talk soon.